Hello, everybody. This is Megan,
And this is Alana.
and welcome to Tea Time Crimes.
The Smooth Station.
That was your sultry opening. That means we're in for a ride, folks. Welcome to Tea Time Crimes. If you've never been here before, Alana brings the tea to review while she sits back and listens to a true crime story that she doesn't like or know anything about. And that's how things operate over here. But she often usually has shenanigans up front. You got anything today?
I am a chaos goblin. Let's see. No, but Mary Kate did say that she always thinks when I'm announced to have some tea that it's gossip. And now I feel like I should have a gossip column on this podcast as well.
I know. We should do that.
Like little snippets of old newspaper gossip would be
Oh my
hilarious.
gosh. I'm going to start sending that to you. Do you remember the time I sent you the picture and it said something like Granny gets married?
It's like ridiculous shit.
I mean, I don't know how old she was because people aged differently back then. She looked about 107 and she was married to somebody who looked about 25. And
Granny still got it.
They were playing the banjo and pretty pumped.
Oh.
And I'm going to start sending you those and have you do a little gossip.
Yes.
Because it happens all the time. I will read about the most brutal murder, and then there'll be two sentences that are underneath it that say, so-and-so went to the hospital on Friday for stomach aches. So I'm going to start sending you that.
Thanks for putting that in the paper.
Yeah, I'm going to start sending you that tea.
I love that. I love that so much.
I do have a quick thing for you, though. Tea time crimes are happening around here. If you don't know about our interns, learn about them. But
They're the worst, except for mine.
Bob and Slappy are now apparently robbers.
These are puppets, y'all.
Of our they're not real. Puppets of our robbers in our house. And my son is going around with his camera that I believe you got him. So this is your fault. You and you and the Reverend and the Reprobate.
I did get him that.
He's going around taking close-ups of these two doing crimes in our home. And so far what it is very close-up pictures of their little creepy hands trying to steal my tea. It's a real tea time crime. Yes. And
that's very on brand. Let's get some of those on the gram.
There were about 100 of these blurry pictures that were very creepy. And then some close-ups of their eyeballs as they were leaving the house. It's something. But, I've gotten pretty comfortable.
Maybe he's going to be what are those people at the crime scenes? The picture takers?
Yeah, picture takers.
Photographers, I guess.
Yeah, I think we can just stick with regular terms. I don't think we have to, the picture takers. Yeah, I've grown pretty comfortable with Slappy. He helps me coach baseball every morning. But these pictures freaked me out. I do not like Slappy in little snippets.
Oh my God, that's next level.
Yeah, it really is.
That is next level shit.
The hands, the little hands. Oof. All right. Well, anyway, I'll send you some pictures of it. It's amazing.
Perfect.
But bring us into the literal tea time.
All right. So today we are going to Hawaii. This is a sunrise tea of the Mamaki tea infusions, and I'm pronouncing that.
Do we need to apologize, or is that accurate?
I don't know. I'm trying. So it has an accent mark.
Sorry, just in case.
Yeah, sorry, just in case. I learned a little bit of Maori, which is obviously many islands away, but like they say the accent mark like that, so I'm going to try to do that. Okay. Be the aloha. Revered for centuries for its health benefits, herbal Mamaki tea is only found and grown in the mineral-rich volcanic soil of Hawaii. Our Mamaki tea is handpicked on Hawaii Island, also known as the Big Island, and then artfully blended with notes of crisp lemon and botanical rose hips for an awakening, naturally caffeine-free morning elixir.
Nice.
In the spirit of kindness and respect, known locally as Aloha, we share Shaka tea with you.
So in the volcanic ash, man.
Yes. At first I was concerned because
Why?
I poured the water. I didn't read what was in it. I just knew it was herbal. And it immediately turned black. And I'm like, what? And then, because I was like, oh, hibiscus, lemon, and rosehip, that's probably like a pinkish tea. But the mamaki of like the soil, the volcanic soil makes a lot of sense. So.
And that's a gamble for Alana because she will often grab teas that are expired on purpose just to see if they're still good. And we've had a couple
Not on
tea
purpose,
reviews.
but like
no, you do. I don't
you
wanna
might as well
waste it.
try. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So that's on purpose. On accident would be if you did not know they were expired. Good night.
What was always a surprising fact to me is that volcanic soil is very nutrient rich. It's really good soil. And I just think of it, I mean, that's how continents are formed. So what do I know? Okay, what are we doing? Drinking tea. Let's go. So it's a very dark.
Yeah.
It's like the deepest violet you've ever seen.
Ooh, is it actually purple or are you just saying that?
It's pinkish. I don't know what the color is. It's like a dark tinged pink at the edges.
Take a picture of the color so we can see it. I mean, not right at this moment, but maybe when I'm talking.
When am I going to take it?
When I'm speaking? Good Lord.
But then I'm going to move around.
All right, well, whatever.
It smells like
we
water.
can all carry on. Oh, nice. Fragrant.
I smell a hint of lemon and some hibiscus. Let's dive in. Whoa!
Oh, that was violent.
That is way more potent than I thought it was going to be based on the smell.
Yeah. Yeah, the smell was so low key.
It's quite nice. The lemon takes over.
Your face is telling a different story. You look as if you just drank lava.
It was just so surprised.
And now you say, it's quite nice.
Yeah. So kind of like a lava spill, but there's no body to it. Just kind of slips down the mountain of your mouth.
Gross.
And like lemon zings you during its fall. But then there's it pools down to like a hibiscus pool under the waterfall.
So room temperature lava, not lava that would melt your skin off your bones?
Correct. This is delightful. I would give this a refreshing thumbs up. There's no caffeine in it, but it does kind of zing you awake.
You really missed the opportunity for an erupting thumbs up.
Oh, but
to both gross me out and say with the volcano theme.
I know, but I gotta say true to the tea. It's not erupting.
Okay. Well, your face erupted with reactions.
It did. That was a big surprise. That was a twist.
Yeah, that's the only plot twist you're getting today. As we transition into the crime, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. In the early 1950s,
okay,
Betty Butler was a young woman in her 20s.
She's a superhero.
Why?
Betty Butler. Come on.
It's a nice name.
That's a classic alias name.
I will also say it is a very popular name, and it was very hard to find stories because, I search by name often at newspapers.com, my best friend, and a lot of Betty Butlers were social, and it was either murder or Betty Butler threw a tea party, or Betty Butler's doing a fundraiser, or there's just a lot of Betty Butlers in the 50s.
Do you think Betty stands for another name?
It's short for Elizabeth, usually. And Betty Butler's mother's name was Elizabeth.
That just blew my mind, but it makes sense.
I know.
Holy shit. All right.
But you don't really go with it anymore. Elizabeths are now Beths or Liz's.
Liz.
Betty. Maybe it'll come back. Anyway.
Maybe.
Betty Butler was a young woman in her 20s, married to a Methodist minister with 2 young children in Cleveland, Ohio.
Fighting crime.
Nope. As a minister's wife, she probably would have had a traditional role of supporting her husband and being an extension of him out in public and keeping up with appearances. I think Betty was able to accomplish this. However, there is absolutely no insight into what her life was like behind closed doors. She never spoke to how her husband had treated her or what her life had been like before she got married. But in 1952, the marriage imploded with no clear motivation as to what happened, but documents state that Betty, quote, associated with lesbians, end quote.
Yes.
So the TV show Deadly Women, which is sometimes dramatized, shows Henry, the husband, throwing Betty out after he discovered she was having an affair with another woman. I don't know if that's 100% true. But based on that document, it seems there was at least some truth to the story. Betty was either gay, bisexual, or maybe wondering herself. Either way, she ended up in Cincinnati without her children and no money to support herself.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Betty was also a Black woman. In 1952, she's subject to segregation and discrimination laws, and possibly facing discrimination for her sexuality because homosexuality was criminalized in that day and age. I mean, it still is around some parts of the world. So she might not be a woman with a lot of options or in the best state of mind after being thrown out of her house, grappling with whatever happened, whether that's feelings of anger or guilt or remorse, and missing her children. It's during this fragile time Betty meets Evelyn Clark, a 30-something-year-old married woman with 2 children of her own. The evolution and nature of this relationship is never 100% clear. But Betty ended up moving in with the family and surviving off of Evelyn's financial support while the 2 women had a sexual relationship.
Oh, so nice.
Well, can you just calm down?
Is the husband still there?
Yep. First off, the husband's still there. Second, Betty later claimed that she was forced into this in order to receive money to survive. So
Jesus,
maybe dial it back until we have the full picture. But I'll let you decide if we think that's the truth. On September 6, 1952, Betty and Evelyn were fishing at Sharon Woods Lake, which today is about 700-acre park with a paved loop around the lake. And the 2 women were in a rowboat with a man named Deasy Ivory. Amazing name. And it's unclear if Deasy was a mutual friend or maybe there to take them fishing. Either way, Evelyn and Betty started arguing on the boat. It was uncomfortable enough that Deasy said, all right, this is no more fishing. We're heading back. And he brought the boat back to shore. I'm not sure if the main fight happened on the boat or once they landed, but Betty attempted to strangle Evelyn.
Whoa.
And Deasy had to physically hold her back and stop her. And he thought he'd had her calm down, and he went to get help because Evelyn was hurt. And Betty promised that it was over. And when he left, Betty choked Evelyn unconscious with a handkerchief. And then she was overheard saying something along the lines of, if I can't strangle her, I'll drown her. And then she pulled Evelyn's body to the water's edge, which was about 100 feet away. It wasn't a hop, skip, and a jump. And then she held Evelyn underwater by holding her legs and forcing the unconscious woman's face to be submerged. Once Evelyn was dead, Betty released her and said, my work is done.
Who's hearing this?
I don't know. It was a very public place. I think there were a lot of people. So for instance, 2 men were in a rowboat 50 to 100 feet away and they witnessed the entire thing.
What?
But they're not getting to shore fast enough to do anything. Park rangers were the first one on the scene, and they noticed Betty was leaving in a car with Deasy, which makes me assume they were friends because that's going above and beyond as a fishing guide to be like, oh yeah, you just killed a woman, let's go.
Yeah, and why did he walk away?
But Betty would say that she met him at the park by accident. So I don't know what that means. How do you meet somebody by accident?
That doesn't make sense.
The 2 rangers pulled Evelyn from the water, and they attempted CPR, but it was too late. Betty did not even attempt to deny what had happened and admitted that she did it and went to jail without incident.
Oh my God.
She was quickly held before a grand jury and indicted on October 3rd for first-degree murder. From here on out, the relationship of the 2 women will be talked about without ever really being talked about because it's the 1950s, and they won't even print certain words. So was this a domestic abuse incident? Did Betty kill Evelyn in a jealous rage because Evelyn was dating someone else? Or was Betty being taken advantage of or abused and had reached a breaking point? Not sure. In March of the following year, Betty was represented by M. Barber and B. McClure as the jury selection began. It ended up being 5 men and 7 women. The Cincinnati Enquirer wrote that the jury would hear about the murder of a, quote, drowning of a woman companion in the lake. So they're calling it a companion. A companion. Yeah.
Got it.
With the trial underway, the jury was brought to the scene of the crime to hear the state describe how Evelyn had been murdered that day. And I imagine that's pretty impactful to show how far Betty had to drag Evelyn and just how much you had to follow through with the murder based off being at the scene. The initial trip to the lake was actually delayed, though, because the bus broke down. But they got it fixed. They got there. Okay, the state had several witnesses who saw parts of the physical altercation or the actual murder, like the 2 fishermen in the boat. And these fishermen said they witnessed Betty shove Evelyn into the water, stop, reach in, pull out Evelyn's wrist, feel for a pulse, and then drop her wrist back into the lake.
Wow. This is like cold-blooded.
Yeah. So it was very clear her intention in that moment.
Yeah.
Pathologist
Damn.
Dr. Frank Cleveland confirmed that the cause of death was technically drowning, but Evelyn had been drunk and unconscious from the strangulation when she was forced into the water.
Oh, so they're drinking on the boat.
I don't know if Betty was drinking.
Wow.
It was never
Okay.
mentioned. Yeah.
Jeez.
The state really had an open and shut case. Betty admitted she did it. People
Yeah.
saw Betty do it. The only strategy the defense has is to create empathy for Betty and make the jury question her motive.
Okay.
So when Betty took the stand, this is her side of the story. Betty said she was in fear for her own life. So much so that she would stay away from the house as much as she could, waiting until dark and sneaking in through a window, or some nights staying away altogether. And this was all done to, quote, avoid forced attentions. Because,
God.
another quote from the paper, the victim was violent in her action and showing an unnatural affection for her. Betty went on to testify that before the murder, Evelyn had renewed affections, and when Betty refused them, Evelyn slapped her and yelled that no other woman could have Betty.
Oh boy.
After that, Betty recalls choking Evelyn but had no memory of drowning her, although she doesn't deny it because she remembers telling the police she did that.
Yeah. Wow. Her kids are still at home with the pastor, right?
They're at home
Betty's
with the
kids?
father, yeah.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
papers will later sum this up as she, meaning Betty, claimed she was a sex slave and killed the victim by drowning her in Sharon Woods Lake to escape her perverted intention.
Oh, God.
So that's the defense angle, is that Betty was being forced into
Yeah.
this relationship, and they're using the term sex slave.
Okay.
After about 6 days in court, the state asks for the death penalty, and the defense asks for a full
Whoa.
acquittal because it was self-defense. Yeah, okay. Seems extreme. For 6 hours, the jury deliberated the fate of Betty Butler, returning the verdict of guilty with no recommendation for mercy,
Oh, no.
meaning she would automatically be sentenced to death. At the time of Betty's conviction, the method is electrocution. Ohio had switched from hanging as early as 1897, first putting to death a 17-year-old boy named William Haas for murder.
Oh, my God.
I know. We've mentioned this previously, but the electric chair was invented by dentist Alfred Southwick.
Yes, this fucking dentist.
I know. Who was attempting to find a more humane method than hanging. And if you don't know what we mean, listen to our episode on Anne Green if you want to understand what Alfred was trying to avoid.
Yeah.
But once invented, the actual design had to be vetted and approved, which led to the involvement of Thomas Edison and his competitor, George Westinghouse. Interestingly enough, neither man supported the death penalty, but they did agree that hanging was very brutal, and their involvement quickly turned into a competition. Edison went so far as to find generators made by Westinghouse for his trials to try and tie the violent act to his competitor's company.
What?
Even trying to call the process Westinghousing.
Wow.
Obviously, that didn't catch on because, one, it's a terrible name.
Didn't catch on.
He shouldn't be in marketing. It reminded me of that Office clip when Andy Bernard is in the car with Michael, and he's like, yeah, everybody around the office says you shrewded it when you mess up. You know, he's like trying to throw Dwight under the bus. That's what it seemed like. So petty.
That's hilarious.
Golly. And the first official execution was absolute torture and did not go well. Not in Ohio, just in general. Still, many states use that method for decades. And Ohio used the electric chair for the last time in 1963.
Okay.
Remember, from there, the death penalty took a little break for a bit.
Yep.
And Ohio reinstated it in 1974 after the Furman versus Georgia case. By the 1990s, technically, electrocution was still the method. They just hadn't used it. And then in 1991, several prisoners on death row had their sentence changed due to racial discrimination being found.
Oh.
So in 2001, the state officially switched to lethal injection. And today, the topic of the death penalty in Ohio is still up for debate. The 2023 Capital Crimes Report reported that 341 death sentences have been given since 1981 to 2023, but only 1 in 6 have been carried out, with most death row inmates spending over 20 years waiting for their final sentence to be appealed or carried out.
And this is in Ohio.
This is in Ohio specifically, which is where Betty is.
Okay.
And it's interesting because you'll see at this time, these death sentences are a quick turnaround, even with all the appeals. On average today, they're sitting there for 20 years.
Ever.
Yeah.
And not all states do it.
And exactly. And it's still contentious everywhere. Some people in Ohio want to abolish the death penalty altogether, and then
Yeah.
others want it to be upheld and to be a more efficient process, I guess, because there are
Ew.
victims of family. Well, not like there are victims of family who want to be alive
like
to see justice
To
carried
die
out.
faster.
Well, if you're only 1 in 6 are actually being carried out, then what's the point of having a sentence that's not technically implemented is the argument. But it's a gross topic, right? It makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So Betty is technically the 4th woman to be handed a death penalty of electrocution, because in 1938,
Okay.
the first female, Anna Marie Hahn, was electrocuted in the state. A second woman had been sentenced in 1944, but she was changed to life in prison.
Okay.
So with Betty, there's another woman, Debbie Dean, sitting on death row. They're together.
Another superhero name.
Betty was also the 7th woman in the state charged with first-degree murder, which is not a lot.
Okay. Yeah,
The
it's
7th woman at all.
Pretty chill. Not doing a lot of crazy shit.
Or just not convicting women,
Yeah,
you know.
could be.
When asked how she felt about the ruling, Betty told reporters, "I slept fine." Which I just feel like
Whoa.
I read that and I thought, man, that is either so cold-hearted or reporters are spinning that.
Or they cut a bunch of shit.
Yeah. They were like, "How did you
Yeah.
sleep, Betty?" And she said, "I slept fine."
Right. The context is missing.
Right. "How do you feel about the verdict?" And she said, "No comment." And they were like, "Well, she said I slept fine."
Yeah. Classic newspapers.
I know. Betty's lawyers get to work right away, requesting a new trial. Her team is not going for an acquittal. Nobody thinks that should be the case. But they're making the argument that it was not murder in the first degree. That it was passion, not premeditation, is what they keep saying. The term heat of passion is thrown around a lot.
Okay.
And the state, of course, upholds their original argument. The judge refused to interfere with the jury's verdict and refused the motion for a new trial. The appeals process is a long road.
Yes.
And her legal team continues to push and try to gain a legal standing that would take death off the table for Betty. That is their best hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until they can rule otherwise, Betty is transferred to Marysville Reformatory to wait on death row, with her original execution date set for August 8th, 1953.
Is it as good as Helen Hazard's?
I don't think so. No, doesn't sound it. A day or two before that dark day in August, Betty is given a stay of execution to allow for the Court of Appeals to hear her case. The amount of times they go back and forth on this, I wonder if anybody's done a study on the psychological effects of having to live through this.
The yo-yo of emotions.
It's awful. It happens
Yeah.
constantly.
Right.
Constantly.
Right. You're like, oh, my day's coming up, and then they'll like yank it back, and then
And it must be
Yeah.
such a weird feeling of not wanting
yeah.
to have the appeal go through because you just want to get it over with, but also hoping because you don't want to die. It's this
I wonder
really,
if you just turn numb after a while.
I think it depends on the person, but it must be so tough. I mean, this is just the first of many.
Yeah.
So that's August 1953, right?
Yeah.
The Court of Appeals upheld the original verdict, saying, quote, "Hard to conceive of more savage or brutal conduct." It was pretty brutal. And the point that they are focusing on is the fact that Betty dragged Evelyn's unconscious body more than 100 feet to then drown her.
And then also checked her pulse. That takes out passion as well.
That to them is enough evidence to classify it as premeditated. And that's what the court is saying. Her date of execution is now set for January 15th, 1954.
It is tough because it's like, what does premeditated really mean? Does it mean 5 minutes before premeditated, or does it have to be 16 hours?
I know.
What's the definition?
I want to talk about that at the end because that's where I fall too.
Okay.
It's very tricky. Like, yeah. Anyway, on death row, Betty was given a parakeet as a pet.
Stop it.
She named the bird Binky.
Also, how annoying would it be to have a bird in a prison? Just saying, generally.
I think.
Let's continue.
I think it's her only source of comfort. Binky
No,
is
no,
her
she would love it, but imagine her cellmates are like, shut that fucking
Well,
bird up.
Binky's her only cellmate, and there's only 2 women on death row, and they're separated by a corridor.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think anybody's paying attention to Binky.
That's so sweet that she got a pet.
Yeah, I guess so.
I love that.
Getting a pet seems to be a.
Speaking of parakeets,
Oh, yes. Do you have one that
There's a
flew into
great
your
account-
backyard? Now you
No.
own it?
There's a great account of a bird named Prince, who's a girl, but they like set her up with all of the fun things, and she's just like a chaos parakeet thing, and it's really funny, and I'll share it on our Instagram.
All right. I look forward to that. So Binky is the only cellmate. Betty's cell does not even have a light bulb. in it, which I don't
What?
understand.
Does she have a window?
Yeah, she does, but I don't think it's, a nice big picture window. I think it's a window with
also
bars.
past 6 p.m.
Yeah,
In
exactly.
the winter, you're fucked.
And the bird was given to
That
Betty by
sucks.
Father Lucier, the Catholic chaplain who is really Betty's only main source of human interaction. And although she'd previously been a Methodist, in prison she started to convert to the Catholic faith.
Oh, wow.
Besides talking about, hold on. I have the parrot named as Blinky and Binky, and now I don't know the parakeet's real name. Well,
I think the parakeet will be okay.
No, I
think
won't
it's
stand
dead.
for that. Binky deserves better. I'm pretty sure it's Binky.
Or Blinky.
But, well, I'm going to find out for you. One moment. Good Lord, I spelled Butler wrong. I mean, someone could just follow my technical life around, you'd just be amazed at how I operate in the world. Binky. Okay. All right.
Mystery solved.
Yeah. So there was a little twist. His or her, I don't think she doesn't know if it's a boy or a girl. She said, Binky.
That's fair.
They. Binky.
Okay.
Sorry, Binks. Okay. Oh, focus.
Love you, Banks.
Anyway.
Aww.
So she's
almost time. Shh, everybody relax.
All right, get it together. So besides talking about Binky, unfortunate autocorrect, Betty had very little to say to the press. She explained this was because she didn't trust him. Fair.
I mean, fair.
Yeah.
I had a great night of sleep.
Yeah. She also has 2 young children, and she does not want details to get back to them that aren't true.
That's fair.
Yeah. And do you remember in the beginning when I said that Betty's husband was a minister? And that was the picture they painted, that she was this minister's wife who had an affair with a woman and then, snapped. Well, Betty does tell the reporters in this article, which is confusing because it's the article where she also says, I don't trust you. She says that her husband is a bellhop at a hotel, and for a reason unknown to her, he just began adding Reverend to his name.
What?
So was he even a reverend or a minister?
Or a little loosey-goosey in the head?
I don't know. And when she said,
wow.
But it was also literally in the article after she said, I'm not going to tell you anything because you guys don't tell the truth. FYI, my husband just adds Reverend to his name.
He's now a Reverend.
I don't know.
So am I.
Anyway, as January 15th approached, Betty was granted a motion to bring her case to the Ohio Supreme Court on March 12th, which again means her execution is delayed, so they have time for this. At the appeal, Betty's lawyers make the same argument, that she should have been found guilty, but of second-degree murder, not first-degree murder, because it was not premeditated.
Okay.
Again, the court has trouble reversing this because Betty made the comment before dragging Evelyn's body, if strangling doesn't work, then I'll drown her, or something along those lines.
Where's Deezy in all of this?
He ran to get
testimony.
help.
No, in the testimony. Is he involved in it?
I'm sure he had to share part of his.
Right?
Yeah. And, I wish that they had more on what he actually said because he's the only person who would have heard the argument. So were they arguing about Betty being with another woman or Evelyn being with another woman? Or was Evelyn trying to make a pass at Betty and Betty said, not today? It would be, that would clear it right up, but they don't say anything about it.
That would really help.
They uphold the verdict. New execution date is set for April 19th. And then they appeal to the governor to intervene. So a clemency hearing is set for April 9th, which then moves the execution date to June 11th. She gets it moved again.
Gosh.
For a final time, Betty's lawyers tried to prove this murder was not thought out beforehand, that Betty did not go to the lake with a handkerchief in her pocket waiting to kill Evelyn, but that she was attacked by Evelyn or snapped when Evelyn made a pass at her. That's what they keep painting as the motive. Yet again, the board agrees with the court, regretting even having taken the case on, saying they made a mistake in not denying the initial motion. A state rep said, quote, trial by jury has proved itself because it brings men and women from all walks of life who can call on their common experience in weighing a case. But we did not know there was this question of homosexuality in this case. What? I don't know why that...
what does that have to do with anything?
Doesn't make any sense. And earmuff if you want to avoid this homophobic statement. The paper went on to sum it up as saying Betty had also received a psych eval, and although saying to stand trial, she did have a, quote, personality disorder that attracted her to both sexes.
Oh my God. It's in the DNA, dumbass.
Oh my gosh. So anyway, yeah. This is where it gets very
Wow.
confusing because obviously Betty
That's
committed
not
the
that
crime.
long ago.
Betty was, I know it. Betty was violent. Betty shouldn't have done what she did.
Yeah, obviously.
But how is the fact that she is a lesbian or
gay.
bisexual affecting what people are willing to change? Anyway, a new date is set for June 11th, like I mentioned, and the governor received tons of letters asking them to spare Betty's life because she has two
Wow.
young children.
Yeah, that's a good reason.
I feel so bad for the governors in these cases. There's really nothing he can do. For you to be
Yeah.
able to overturn a death sentence as a governor, you need some sort of new evidence. And he doesn't have any. It's like,
Yep.
So the governor, he chooses not to do anything. The Cincinnati Post writes, she answers questions of prison personnel. She is polite, but she isn't friendly and doesn't waste any words. I love that they always expect
too.
women on death row to be the life of the party. Are
Be
you
bubbly
kidding?
and bright.
I know. Like, what? First off, one, Betty just might not be that type of person, but also,
Yeah.
she's about to die. I don't think she's
Yeah.
interested in talking about. Do you remember? I forget who it was. Do you remember the other woman who the prison guard quit because she was too quiet, didn't talk to her enough?
Yep.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah, get it together, folks.
So I need to find some articles of men on death row at this time and see if see how they're represented. I'm sure they're like, oh, they're very calm and collected and taking their sentence like a man. Whereas Betty's, she's not mean, but she's not talking to us. Get over yourself. And it gets worse. The article continues with, quote, to all outward appearance, about the only thing Betty Butler regrets is that she is gaining weight. She is fed well, has to keep regular hours, and gets only a limited amount of exercise in addition to pacing her cell, and the pounds have come. And Betty doesn't like to talk about the extra weight. Are you kidding me? Even on death's doorstep, women's bodies are still talked about.
Yeah.
Get over yourself.
Freak. Ugh.
No wonder Betty doesn't want to talk to you. Get out.
Yeah.
Leave her and Binky alone.
Shut up.
Golly. Anyway, Betty spends her time meeting with the Catholic priest and drawing. She's actually quite good at drawing. They posted some of her sketches in the paper, and she sends these drawings to her kids, which breaks my heart. When a final pardon from the governor does not come, Betty and Father Lucier make the trip to the Ohio jail. The P word is there, but I'm not going to attempt it. Yeah, if you don't know, listen to any other episode where I attempt to say the word. For her last meal, Betty asks for milk, scrambled eggs, toast, and apricots.
I feel like I could do better.
Well, a lot of people were saying that, the prison matron actually said, we offered her steak and lobster and she didn't want it. You can't have much of an appetite.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That meal sounds like something you'd have when you don't feel well.
Yes.
And I think that makes sense.
That's a good point. I probably wouldn't be able to eat before it.
How could you? She had one final visit with her mother, her husband, and her two children. Can you imagine? I know that Betty is a murderer and she admits it, but can you imagine having to see your children for the last time and knowing it's the last time? That's not a common occurrence.
It's awful. How are you going to act?
Oh, golly, because you don't want to be a mess because you don't want to upset your
this
children.
Is the last time.
But you also, it must be the most
memory.
Heartbreaking pain that you can imagine. And also that this will be their last memory of you in prison.
Yeah.
In the prison dress, not as just their regular mom. And it's not like you get to sit and read and spend time with them.
Right.
Ugh, I know, Betty did bad stuff, but it's still sad. Betty Butler's time of death was 8:10 p.m. on June 11th, 1954. Holding a cross, she entered the chair silently and took her last breath without a word. She was the fourth woman in Ohio to be put to death. So this is not a complicated crime. We know who did it, but do we ever really know why?
Right. We don't know enough about the relationship.
Is the sex slave story true? Or is it something created to give Betty a second chance? Maybe it was a product of being a necessity at the time, and that was the best legal strategy her lawyers could come up with. Because if Betty had admitted to being in a relationship with another woman willingly, how would that have gone over? Even as late as 1999, there was a case in Ohio that went all the way to the Supreme Court because a man made a pass at another man, which was technically against the law. I don't know the full story of the case because I was focused on Betty, but it was overturned in 2002. And all of that is to say, if that's going on 50 years later,
Whew.
imagine the situation Betty was in when it came to a legal defense.
Yeah.
I thought about this a lot, and I would argue that crimes of passion are easier to understand, which is what her lawyer kept saying, are easier to understand and more probability of being considered second-degree murder if it's between
Mm-hmm.
two partners, right? A husband and a wife or a woman and a woman nowadays. But at that time, that's not something that's going to be even looked at. So if Betty had done this to her husband or her boyfriend, do you think she would have been given first-degree murder charge and sentenced to death? I don't know. I think they would have thought, oh, Betty got jealous. And they could have leaned into that. Oh, Betty flew into a jealous
Yeah.
rage. He cheated on her before. She was upset.
Right.
And so many people, even though they're like, hey, you went too far, would have understood a little bit of that. They would have
Yeah.
understood that feeling of being jealous. Betty can't do that in this case.
No.
Because the fact that it's with a woman is immediately shutting it down. And so I wonder, again, there's no question of Betty's guilt here, but is the perception of Betty being in a relationship with a woman tying her hands legally, which is why the sex slave story was created?
Right.
I mean, there's also the possibility that Betty was telling the truth or parts of the truth and that she had agreed to sexual relationship for money or room and board. And she also doesn't really want to lean into that portrayal either because her lawyers thought that's not going to go well. People aren't going to like that either.
Right. Right.
And we don't know enough to know. Maybe Evelyn was also taking advantage of her. But I would need to know more about Evelyn. I would need to know more from Betty, where Evelyn was so abusive that Betty felt she couldn't walk away. Was that the case?
Right. Right. Exactly. Because it sounded like she willingly entered and stayed in the house.
Right.
And it decimates her argument a little bit because she's pleading for her life. And so, like, will you just do desperate things to save your life? Like, say things like that, which, you know, on its own could be analyzed a certain way. But if you put in the context of that, it makes it that much harder to not believe or prove. But, like, you know, there's definitely less credibility when you're facing a life sentence and you'll say whatever you need to say.
Yeah. And at that point, none of us, well, I mean, some of us can, but none of us here can understand what it's like to have your life on the line and have a team of people who say, listen, I've done this for 20 years. This is your only chance at surviving.
Right.
Is to say this. Do you want to see your children grow up? This is the only shot you have at that. And so it's hard to say. If I had to guess, I feel that maybe they were in a relationship and it was a fight it was a domestic abuse fight. It was a fight about jealousy. It was something that happened because they were in a relationship. I don't think Betty was being held prisoner, but
we don't know.
We don't know. If she was, it's a hard sell in those days too, because they're not going to be looking into the cycles of trauma and the, you know, why didn't you just walk out the door? And like those things, like all the explanations that we've come to know and understand, those aren't around. And it's also Betty's having to, if she was in the relationship on her own free will, she's having to say she wasn't, which is yucky too, because that's her only chance. It's just, it's a weird case. I don't think she should have been put to death, although I'm pretty rigid with my death penalty sentences, but I feel that it should have probably been second degree murder, or it should have been first degree with mercy, as they say, with a recommendation of mercy. But it was incredibly violent. It was incredibly aggressive. It was, to strangle somebody takes time and strength and effort, and then to drag them, it's very scary. And think Evelyn had a husband and children as well.
Yeah, I know.
And it's painting Evelyn as this mean woman who abused Betty. And if that's not true, you know, she had a husband who found out for the first time that his wife was having an affair with another woman, and 2 children lost their mother on that end too. It's heartbreaking all around. And so I don't think Betty should have gotten off, but I don't know that she should have been put to death.
That's really tough. I mean, I don't think she should have been put to death And it's just there's such a mystery around the relationship.
Yeah, and they're never going to dive into it.
That would actually tell the story.
Yeah,
No,
even if
they're
Betty
not.
told her lawyers, they're just gonna say, well, we can't say any of those things.
Yeah.
Because it's the 50s, and that's not, you'll be guilty before we even talk about the murder. So
Gosh, I just wish we knew what DZ said.
I know, right? What were they fighting about? That would clear it all up. Betty was saying that Evelyn was jealous of her, saying you can't leave, you can't be with another person.
Mm-hmm.
But they were kind of going along the lines of it was more of a fight where Betty was jealous. Either one could have been the case. And Evelyn's also drunk, which makes her not great at fighting back, and who knows what she was saying. It's a very volatile situation.
And it's weird. You'd think like a fight of passion would just happen on the boat during the argument. And I know once they got to shore.
Yeah, she really stuck with it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, you'd be like, oh, shit, like, I need to step away. That was too violent.
Yeah, I think that's where people were struggling because I think
and I get
she was
it.
calm enough that DZ felt he could leave and get help. And then he comes back and is like, what the heck?
And she's dead.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't really think the death penalty is appropriate here, but I definitely think it was a pretty bad murder.
It really was violent.
Yeah. And it just I do understand the premeditated part. Like, if premeditated is not the right word, it's very collected and thorough and planned.
It's very calculated.
Planned at least in the last 5 minutes.
Within 5 minutes, yeah. And that brings up a good point. What is considered premeditated?
Right.
I mean, I'm sure there's a legal definition that would serve us, but if we just choose to ignore that and pretend Google doesn't exist, I think it's did you go
it's the
to
80s.
Did you go? That's the 50s. Oh, you're saying we're in the 80s.
Yeah.
Did you go to the location with the purpose of murdering the victim?
And why have DZ in a boat and take a while to get there?
And I don't think she did. Once the argument started,
then she's like, this is what's going to happen.
It happened. And that to me doesn't seem premeditated.
I wonder if Evelyn just said something so terrible that just tipped her over.
It could have. They had the psych eval, which was, BS. But
awful.
That's certainly not the reason why she liked women. But maybe she did have a psychological disorder that led to her aggression.
Yeah.
And her inability to control herself in that moment.
Gosh, definitely not a superhero.
No, you always do that. You really jump off the deep end there.
No, she missed the mark. You're born with a name like that. I should be fighting crime, not doing that.
Yeah, that's on you, Betty.
It's on you, Betty.
So what are your last words?
I just have so many thoughts and questions, and I need to know more about the relationship.
I don't think you're ever going to know.
I guess if one of your friends strangles another friend, hang around and don't walk away.
Take the friend with you to get help.
Also that's a good idea. And let's be a little less free on handing out those death sentences,
Well,
let's reserve them for really bad things.
Betty is the last woman to have been executed in Ohio.
There we go.
Last woman.
Good job, Ohio. Yeah.
And that doesn't mean there aren't women on death row. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a gross business. Not a business, but you know what I mean. Affair.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you don't think of executioner as being a job, but somebody has to do that.
Yeah.
And that's something I could never do.
I mean, I think about that all the time. People
really?
who deal in morgues and executioners, and people have to clean up all the bodily fluids generally at crime scene. All of those things. That's somebody's job.
Yeah.
It's a certain person. You hope they're paid well. They've got to be paid well to do stuff like that.
I imagine some of them. I imagine today the executioner is a doctor.
Not a guy wearing a black mask.
Not a guy in a black hood with an axe. But I don't know. That's probably one of those weird things.
I wouldn't be anywhere near there.
Where maybe they feel like it's a very unique skill to have and to provide somebody a little bit of comfort in their final moments. Because I bet you that can be a really, really terrible couple of minutes if you have a bad executioner. And maybe there is some level of feeling like it's a responsibility. It's a weird development in society. When we talk about Maeve. I mean, they just killing people every which
Oh, yeah.
way and executing the people for everything, for anything. It didn't matter. And so we've tried to like harness that into these rules and regulations.
Yeah,
and
we're a bit more careful about it.
it's still like, is that okay to do? It's still this taboo
Right, like-
subject that everybody is conflicted on.
Yeah. Yeah.
As a whole, maybe certain people know for sure. But anyway, all right. Who should listen?
Sheesh. Psychologists. Hopefully you're not still doing this. I don't know. Defense teams. People who are in charge of giving pets in jail. I wonder if they still do that.
Oh, sorry. Animals. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like somebody goes around and strokes prisoners. I was like, this took a really weird turn.
Boy.
Please don't do that. Yeah, animals.
Stop petting the prisoners.
I don't think they do that anymore. I mean, all of these women who were arrested always had kittens and birds.
Yeah, like they need a companion. I mean, that would make it so much better, I'm sure. But
yeah,
I do think they have certain programs where they'll put like rehab dogs with prisoners and they like rehab together, which is so cool.
I know.
You know, you're responsible for something and that can make a big difference in somebody's life.
Yeah.
To change them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a fascinating concept. And I think it's pretty neat. And especially for like if you're pairing shelter dogs who would otherwise be euthanized.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm going down a rabbit hole, but I just think it's a really cool thing to do.
What do you think happened to Binky?
Maybe she got passed along to the next prisoner?
Maybe. I'd like to think that Binky could go home with her children, but I doubt it.
That would be nice.
I don't know how long parakeets live.
But I feel like their dad doesn't want anything to do with Betty.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he brought the kids to see her, and I guess he didn't need to. Her mother was there. He brought the kids to see her. Maybe he felt, who knows? We don't know. I mean, we don't know if he's even irreverent.
I mean, he kind of kicked off a lot of this stuff.
I know.
Right.
Maybe he felt bad. Maybe he felt like he was too harsh and should have been more understanding. Or, I mean, she still cheated on him, whether or not it was with a man or a woman. So you have to kind of understand that part of it. But maybe he was thinking, I shouldn't have turned her away like that. And then none of this would have happened.
We don't know much about him other than he was a fake reverend.
Or a real one, and she was lying, or the papers were lying. We still don't know. I hate to say he wasn't one if he was.
Just crazy, yeah. I guess bellhops and reverends.
Yeah, either or.
This is for you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. You can find us on all the platforms at
Tea Time Crime.
You can email us at
teatimecrimes@gmail.com.
Please rate, review, like, subscribe, send us recommendations for teas and crimes, and we will be back next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.